Hi, I'm Michael Allison. I'm the Commercial Director at Roma Finance, and welcome to another episode of RomaTalks, where we meet people from across the property industry, and more importantly, some of our colleagues at Roma Finance too. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by our Senior BDM, George Tuffin. Hello, George.
Morning, Michael. How are we?
I'm all right. You give the game away that it's morning time as well there. But thanks very much for joining us. So before we go any further, obviously I know you really well. Why don't you tell everyone who you are and what you do at Roma?
So I'm George. I'm Senior BDM at Roma, covering the north of England. Anything from working with brokers to packages, that type of stuff. But I also work with some direct customers as well.
And how long have you been with us?
It's got to be pushing into my 8th year.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's just turned 7 full years. So yeah, almost 8 years. Going into 8 years.
Is that your longest ever job?
Yeah, I'm surprised as you are.
I'm not surprised. So obviously 8 years in it. So where did it all begin, your career in specialist finance, before we talk about Roma?
So previous to this, I was playing rugby and coaching. So that was like my main sort of drive in life was rugby, coaching, playing and seeing what I could do. Ended up doing a coaching degree at uni. And then
in league or union or both?
Union, always union. Just a slightly more complex game. But what I found was that was my drive. So when I left uni, I moved back up north to Cheshire, and it was kind of revisited my old school, was coaching, and that was really good. Had a placement with the RFU, so I was doing like grassroots rugby stuff around Cheshire, but it wasn't the earner, or wasn't earning enough money that I really wanted to do, to be honest. It was kind of, that whole thing of in really, really enjoying it and learning quite a lot, but not really having the lifestyle that I wanted. So one of my very good friends said, "Oh, why don't you come work for this company? We're looking for people." And it was a sales role, which I'd kind of done before, but it was for a large company. And I started off basically selling unsecured personal loans on the phone, inbound. Did that for a little bit, was pretty good at it. It was quite easy. Moved on to outbound. Once I'd completed that, I wanted to sort of see what the next step was. So I ended up joining their dwindling B2B proposition. So this company did majority second charge loans, a bit of buy to let, but the bread and butter was generally second charge loans. So we ended up growing this team to probably 10 people. But because of the company, we couldn't really move forward. We got approached by another company. So I ended up leaving that company. I was probably there for like 3 years. Left that company, went to startup. Is 3 people in a tiny office. The previous company was probably 200, 250 people. We'd then gone to 3 people, in a room probably a bit smaller than this. And the phones weren't ringing. No one was calling up saying, "Oh, I've got a deal for you."
Was that still in finance, was it all?
Yes, it was all still in finance. Majority sort of second charge, but we were branching out. And, that's when it was the realization of you've got to pick up the phone, start dialing and telling people who you are, how you can work with them. And that's where I learned the most. The nice thing was we had a few BDMs at lenders that really supported us and kind of gave us a leg up, which I'll never forget that. We were made redundant from that job probably about 11 months in, which was a shame because we were really motoring. And that was like the first time I'd ever been made redundant. And obviously I had bills to pay. So took another job with a packager. Wasn't really, didn't really turn out how it was sold to me. So, I'd kind of been in 2-3 packages now in the space of maybe 4 or 5 years.
So that's the other side of the coin. It's not actually lending the money, it's getting people.
Yeah, exactly. And it was still specialist. I never did high street lending or that sort of stuff. So I was my roots are always in specialist lending. But I wanted to see what the other side of the coin was. Because I was on the sales front, the sales end, it was, this lender asked for this and this, this and this. Mm-hmm. But I never really knew what looks good to a lender. I didn't really know what it meant when stuff went to credit and all this type of stuff. For me, it was matching the customer with the product and all that sort of thing. So I got approached through a recruiter to speak to this sort of company called Roma. And I'd heard of Roma before. They came into the office where I worked years ago. It was Dan and Scott, because where our team was, it was right next to the boardroom. So people used to walk all the way up the office, walk past us and go into the boardroom.
You could have a good look who it was.
Yeah, exactly. See who they were. And I can still remember, it was Dan and Scott. Didn't know them, didn't know anything about Roma. But found out a bit more. Thought, this could be like quite a good fit. It was, it was bridging. It was fairly agile. Something I could take the next step and further sort of develop my own experience, really. I then had a second interview in the office, which was a bit of an eye-opener. Normally you think lenders are big, shiny, loads of money. Turned up to Cheetham Hill, and it wasn't the same sort of story as I envisaged, basically. But again, met Dan for the first time, and there's no better promoter of Roma than Dan Hill. But he was really good. And then I was like, right, the final hurdle was the boss. So I then had a meeting with Scott at 6:30, I think it was, in the morning, at the Marriott near the airport. He's like, "Oh, do you want to meet me for breakfast?" And I was like, "Yes."
6:30 in the morning.
6:30 in the morning. And obviously, because I didn't want to be late, I was there at like 5:45.
Well, you've changed since then.
I've relaxed a bit.
So you've got a 6:30 breakfast appointment with your future boss.
Yeah, so and obviously, because I never really had a meeting with sort of the MD, the boss before, so I was even more nervous. Managed to find Scott in the maze of what the hotel was. And then, it was amazing. It was like really relaxed. And the biggest thing for me was, and what sold me on joining Roma was Scott, to be honest. He really wanted to move the company in a certain direction. At that point in my life, he understood totally where I was. He understood what I wanted to achieve, where, the path that I wanted to do. And from then on it was sign me up, to be honest.
So a lot's happened. So that was 8 and a bit years ago.
Yep.
Is what you had that breakfast. You were a bit let down by the office in Gmail. What's changed since?
Do you know what? Roma's changed. It's such a night and day difference, all for the better. I was the 11th person into the company back in 2018, and it was a very small bridging lender. We only really did standard bridging. I think the muckiest thing we did was commercial to resi was probably the most heavy thing that we did. And I think now, yourself included, the people we have in place is just putting Roma on the right path. We traded so well through COVID, and one thing that I wanted to mention was there's so many bridging lenders out there, from small private people to big institutions, but even from the broker days all the way through to what I see now and what I hear, everyone has their own niche. And I genuinely feel that no one really understands the property investor journey better than Roma. We kind of stay in the lane of property investment. All our processes are geared towards that happening quickly. And because we're, day in, day out, purchases, refinances, all that type of stuff, you start spotting gaps. And because of, the people we have in sort of senior management, marketing, the sales guys as well, when we say, "Oh, wouldn't it be great to have like this product," or "Can we try and do that a bit better?" it gets picked up and we're quick to react to it, which I think gives us, and hopefully our introduced and customers, a really, really good feeling, and obviously complete their projects a bit better.
Yeah, I think agility is key, isn't it? Bridging, everyone in bridging says they're fast, and everyone in bridging says that, they can get the deal completed. There's variances in between.
Yep.
You're right in what you're saying. It can be somebody who's a private lender all the way up to a big company. But I think it's carving out the niche within the niche, isn't it? But if you're agile, you can take opportunities.
I think agility, but also leadership. The way the directors and senior management team and the board sort of navigated and almost looked into a crystal ball and saw what was happening in sort of 2020. Because I'm after the days of 2008 and all that sort of stuff. When I came to the market, everything was all done. But I was buying a house in 2020, and obviously sat down with Scott and he was like, "Oh, what are you buying? This type of stuff." And he taught me through almost a play-by-play of how the shutdown and the restrictions happened. And I think having that experience across the whole of the company just puts us in a stronger position for the future, and also our customers.
Yeah, I think probably COVID was a bit of the watershed moment for Roma. It looked after the customers really well, looked after the colleagues really well, but saw it as I think Scott always likes to use that phrase, volatility creates opportunity, and it was a very volatile world. And we went for it. We onboarded Charlotte into the marketing piece, and from 2001 onwards, it's just been pure growth trajectory, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So what do you like most about your job? So you talked about the company. What is it that you specifically like?
I think the main thing that drove me into the role and how I really like the role and how it's slightly hybrid is I've always liked getting my teeth into a deal. So, not just the, hi, I'm George from Roma, but actually getting the deal, know what I'm talking about, pricing it, structuring it in a way that's going to work for Roma. That's probably one of my favourite things of it, because they come in all shapes and sizes and some square pegs and round holes. You've got to make it work. But just the people that I work with, the people I meet, the opportunities I get to do, I think I've built some really, really good relationships, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to, in my position, to support, one of my biggest, promoters of me, but then I also promote their business. A personal friend that's had a brokerage, and we worked together quite a lot, and we kind of went our separate ways when we both got made redundant. He started up his own company. I went to go work for a company. And it's amazing to see how that company's grown. And, luckily we've been able to support it at Roma.
That's Tom at Beat Finance.
Yeah, Tom at Beat Finance. And, they're doing great things at the moment.
Yeah, real good partner of ours,
Yep.
Maybe we might get Tom on.
Yeah, definitely.
I have to make it a double episode
Yeah.
just to get it in. No, so that's what you like. What is it that you don't like about the role?
I think
there must be something.
Yeah, there's always like with any job, there's always stresses. But it's how you manage those stresses. They can be things such as getting a deal in and the property's had down vals, or we find something wrong with the property. And for me, it's how you work with the customer or the broker to make that happen. One of the biggest things is you can't be afraid of a negative conversation, because everyone has problems. Just don't take it to heart. If you've got a bad call to do, or if there's an issue to sort out, pick up the phone, work it out, because that speaks more volume than anything else. Or sending an email saying, "Oh, sorry, we can't do this." Try and find a solution to it, because from my experience as a broker, that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
So I was in probably a slightly more mainstream market, but even when the biggest thing and I think it bolsters me, because I know what brokers go through. I know the competition out there, and I know that there's every lender under the sun calling them up every day and saying, can we have some business, that type of thing. You need to be able to separate yourself from a BDM's point of view, just to develop, how does this company work? What's what makes them tick? Because everyone's different. It can be, just doing a load of deals. Some people really obsessed with football. Other people, more sensible people, obsessed with cars. And everyone has their own thing. And I think when you find that out about someone, it becomes less of a work relationship. You're calling someone up because, you've got a few deals to talk about with them, but you want to find out how the weekend was gone, how they did on that, last football game, on what happened and all that sort of stuff.
Brilliant. So where do you see you've been in the industry now for a long period of time, in specialist lending, either in secured lending on people's own homes, bridging, development? Where do you see specialist lending going as an industry in the next 8 years, I guess?
Yeah. So my main thing is, I think specialist lending will become more aligned with potential high street lending. I think it's, you've probably seen it over post-COVID, how specialist lending is more utilised now than ever before. You look at people going to auctions, people gone, things like Homes on the Hammer and all that sort of stuff. The traditional lending isn't sustainable for the future of what we see in the market. And I think probably what a lot of other non-high street brokers see in the market, that the growth of the high street broker, even though, we go to a few shows now and there's a load more younger mortgage brokers, which is really good to see. But the main thing is, they're asking about specialist finance. They're asking about, how I can bolster their own knowledge to keep the customer closer, rather than having to go to packages and all that sort of thing. Because the relationships with them are the main thing. And with the growth of it, I think we'll see more aligning in regards to maybe a bit of regulation. And I think people will have to adjust to that. It's like with anything, you can't do the same thing, continue to do it, and expect to do more of it.
No, I think you're right. I think specialist lending is becoming, there's more people who understand and want to utilise it. So it will become, I think you're right, it will become the yardstick of lending, won't it?
Yeah, and I see it now, you know, those companies that kind of have diversified from being mortgage brokers, they've almost split their company in half just to create a commercial element or a non-regulated element, or it may be a specialist element, just to keep those two portions separate. And more power to them.
Yeah, good. Okay, so that's work. What do you do outside the work?
Oh, not that much, to be honest. I'm a bit boring. My main things are, I mean, I'm a father of a 3-year-old, married as well, and for me, that was my main drive in life. When I mentioned that, you know, Scott understood what I wanted to achieve in life, you know, Roma's offered me the ability to, you know, before I joined Roma, I was renting. I wasn't married, obviously no children, and it's, you know, in that time, we managed to plan a really good wedding, got married, bought our first house, which was really good. You know, surprised we could actually afford it. But then also we had our first child, and I think for me that's my biggest driver. Everything I do is always about providing for them, making sure we've got enough stuff. But when I'm not worrying about family, I do like cars. Quite a petrol head, and I think that kind of comes from, like, my dad always liked cars. My mum's dad had always liked cars, and, you know, when I grew up, there was always some sort of cool car knocking around, and then as soon as I could kind of reach the steering wheel, you know, I was driving cars around the driveway or helping my dad, like, park it up, and he'd do the gears and pedals, whatever. But yeah, kind of got a few project cars, done a lot of motorsport driving, bit of track stuff. Yeah. Just for fun though. So, like, a big part of my life was, like, drifting, if you know what that is.
I've no idea what drifting is.
But basically, kind of like throwing a rear-wheel drive car around the track sideways, creating lots of smoke and all that sort of thing. It's kind of, for me, it's
like the Fast and the Furious.
Yeah, almost like the whole Tokyo Drift type thing.
Wow, okay.
But I mean, there's so much in my life of, like, work, family, all that sort of separate noise. When you're throwing a car towards a wall at 80 miles an hour and trying to figure out, I need to get round this corner, that all the other stuff in the background of life kind of sort of, you know, disappears, and your main focus is what's happening at the moment, quite challenging and all that sort of stuff. So for a long time, I used that as, like, my kind of breakaway from real life, to be honest.
So anyone who knows you, George, I'm sure there'll be people, brokers, that you're cool and you're calm, but then at the weekend, what you like to do is drive a car at a wall 80 miles an hour and spin around.
Yeah.
That's basically,
I mean, the wall's in the periphery, but ideally I'm trying to get around the corner.
Right, okay.
As cool as possible, to be honest.
So maybe that's it, Fast and the Furious, and a bit like bridging.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there's all sorts of challenges that come across, both from, you know, the property world, but also the automotive world. You know, your property might down value, you know, you might blow a head gasket, who knows? But it's how you deal with it and move on, really.
Brilliant. I never thought I'd get a tenuous link between driving a car and doing bridging finance, but
you're welcome.
Well done. George, it's been a pleasure talking about your last 8 years at Roma and beyond, and we're looking forward to working with you in the future.
Yeah, thank you
very much. And thanks very much to everybody else for watching. Thank you.